Thank you, Donna. Again, want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your precious day to join us. So I want to welcome you on behalf of the Greenspond Center, where I serve as the Justice Organizer. Rabbi Judy Schindler is the Director, but also Restorative Justice CLT, where by God's grace I'm serving as the chair. So we wanted to welcome you and Judy Schindler, who is really my co-partner and co-chair, and a little bit of everything we do. But again, wanted to really thank you for taking this time as we spent some time going over what we believe could be a historic resolution, um, and it's not like it's something that we have started working on overnight. We believe this has been a year-long process. In fact, our 1-year anniversary is coming up of our first listening session, which I believe was August the 22nd at Little Rock AME Zion. And that was our first listening session on this matter. And so now here we are today. And yesterday, the city council, the mayor has agreed that I believe on August the 11th, there will be August the 10th, they have agreed that the resolution will be on the agenda. And so what we want to do in these next 2 weeks is to get energized, and we want to get organized, because we feel as though we have one shot at this. And so for my 5 minutes, I was thinking about what I wanted to say, and I started writing some stuff down, and but I felt like I wanted to speak from my heart. And as a pastor, I had a little prayer, and what came to my mind is the time is now. The time is now. And the reason I say that is because, as we all know, this is a historic moment for many reasons. And in this historic moment, there has been the space to have a conversation that many of us have probably not had and felt comfortably having in our lifetimes. Some things that we have thought to ourselves privately, now we're all able to discuss those things, and we're wondering out loud things about justice, fairness, and equity. And so the time is now. We have the opportunity to push strongly, I want to say almost demand, that the city council, the mayor, the county commissioners, all those who are in power in Charlotte, we have an opportunity to demand and to press for equity and justice in Charlotte. The reality is that there is two Charlottes. And if there's ever going to be one Charlotte, now is the time to make those demands, to make those requests, and the time is now to do those things. There's two cities, and we have an African-American community that is really, really suffering every single day. And the reality is, uptown and places that you might consider the wedge, though that's an area of prosperity, but in areas where I serve and pastor, those are areas of deep poverty. And COVID-19 is hitting those areas in a disproportionate way. The violence, and we believe that the violence in the shooting, those things are not happening because people are less than human. These are the things that happen in poverty. And so what we're asking for is for the city government and for Charlotte to finally say that there has been historical mistreatment of African Americans for the last 100 years. And we're not asking for reparations. We're asking for restorative justice. we're saying that it has been illegal and immoral to create this system that has robbed African Americans and Blacks in Charlotte for 100 years, documented 100 years. And so with redlining and restricted deeds, highways being built through communities, we're talking about urban renewal. We talked about selective policing in different areas. We have a problem of upward mobility in Charlotte. It is because the Black economy is really suffering. And the Black economy is suffering not because African Americans are less intelligent and less ambitious than our white counterparts. We are suffering economically because there has been sabotage and there has been oppression, and there just has been policy and laws that have been created to keep the African American community down and has not allowed us to compete at the same level as whites in this city. And so now is the time to say there needs to be justice in Charlotte, and the city government and the mayor has to lead us on that journey. They can no longer delegate this to other nonprofits and other philanthropic agencies. This is the city government's responsibility to fix the upward mobility problem. And we thank you for joining us in this fight for justice. Now, I want to introduce to you a person who's rapidly becoming my best friend in Charlotte. His name is Joel R. Segal. He has served with grace as a senior legislative director for Congressman John Conyers. He helped spearhead the Medicare for All Act. He worked in city council here in Charlotte. He worked in DC. And again, when I say the time is now, I believe as a pastor and as a theologian, I believe that when God begins to put pieces together, it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, prayer without action is superstition. God has brought pieces together. Joel is one of those pieces, and I turn the floor over to Joel. Joel R. Segal, thank you.
No, thank you, Reverend Keaton. And is it okay if we have one distinguished minister follow another distinguished minister, because Reverend Sadler, I know, has to leave shortly.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
No. That was beautiful, by the way. I'm glad you spoke from your heart. But Reverend Sadler, if it's okay, if you could talk a little bit about why this is so important, the resolution, the One Charlotte campaign. Thank you. And then I'll go ahead and start.
Well, thank you all so much for this opportunity to speak tonight. And let me just say to Willie Keaton and to Judy Schindler and to Joel Segal, who are heading up this effort so significant in such a significant way, that this is work that's long overdue in the city of Charlotte. We are at a critical juncture in our history as a city. We are at a point in which we have come to realize the inevitability of the fact that there's great disparity in the city. We live in two different Charlottes, one Black and impoverished and dealing with long-term modes of oppression, one very white and very wealthy that has been able to take advantage of the disadvantage of African Americans. As we're at this juncture, we have seen over the years how these disparities have lined up. We've seen the suffering of African Americans in the Knight report years ago that talked about the distrust between Black and white people. We've seen the imbalance that exists in the Chetty report that talked about us being 50th out of 50 in terms of upward social mobility. And we recognize that even in the midst of that we are divided along racial lines. We've recognized the disparities that exist as we've looked at the city as a division between a crescent, Black and brown and largely impoverished, and a wedge, white and very much wealthy. We've looked at these disparities, we've come to understand them, and now as we are in the midst of these two intersecting crises, the COVID-19 crisis and the George Floyd uprisings, we can't deny that we have to do something about this imbalance. What we see here in this resolution is a wonderful opportunity for Charlotte to get ahead of this curve. It's a wonderful opportunity for Charlotte to look at the various systems that exist within our city, some of which are city functions, some of which are county functions, and some of which are school board functions, and begin to make targeted changes that will improve the status of African Americans in the city. In essence, we have the chance right now to begin to make definitive decisions that will move us forward as a community. The time is now. We can no longer sit back and wait. We can no longer wait for someone else to step up to the forefront. But right now, we have the opportunity. And each one of us as citizens of this city can get behind this resolution, can stand up, can call our city council people, can make appointments to sit down and meet with them and talk about why this is a optimal solution, can call the mayor, and can even get in touch with people on our county commission and in other parts of our government, our school board, our superintendent, and let them know that they have a role to play in this significant work going forward. I want to tell you that I'm an eternal optimist. Many people think that the race problem is an intractable problem, a long-term problem, a problem that will never be solved. But I'm here to tell you today that we can solve this, and the only thing that's stopping us is our will to stand up and do something about it. So I'm going to ask you today if you would have that collective will to stand behind this particular resolution, to step up to the plate, and to do your part to make sure that this gets passed on August the 10th, that this gets a hearing that has enormous support from the popular community, that this is an ordinance that will go forward and transform our community for the better. The only thing that's standing between a better Charlotte and the one that we have now is our collective will to do something about it. God bless you all, and I wish you all the best in this conversation tonight.
Thank you, Reverend Sadler. Very difficult to really follow two ministers, after these geniuses have spoken. But I'm so honored to be with everyone tonight. And Willie, I want to thank you for just giving me this opportunity to speak, and Rabbi Judy Schindler. I was very close to Representative John Lewis. His passing has saddened me greatly. I worked with him for 13 years, and Representative John Conyers, who was actually chosen by Martin Luther King to represent the civil rights movement, was my biggest influence. And John Lewis used to come into our office all the time. And whenever I was really getting depressed about the universal healthcare effort in Congress, it was quite difficult at that time. He used to always, keep me going. And I feel like that Dr. Keaton is in the spirit of John Lewis, and Dr. Keaton is in the spirit of Martin Luther King. And Dr. Willie Keaton is in the spirit of John Conyers. And I want to thank Dr. Keaton and Rabbi Judy Schindler for years of groundbreaking work on restorative justice and economic and social justice in Charlotte, North Carolina. They are in the great tradition of Martin Luther King and Rabbi Heschel, two of the great civil rights leaders in the 1960s, and both great Americans who made our country more just, fair, and moral. I also want to thank all the young people and all those from all walks of life who have participated in the Black Lives Matter protest in Charlotte and all across this nation since the tragic murder of George Floyd. Yes, Black Lives Matter. Now is the time to build on the movement of the Black Lives Matter movement and take it to the suites and the streets. The time, as Reverend Keaton said, is for action. I was born in Charlotte and raised here. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 23 years, and I decided to move back to the city that I always loved. But like many of you, I would like to live in a new Charlotte, a city where there is true hope, a city where all people live with dignity and a real opportunity to achieve the American dream and have a better life for themselves and their families. But friends, let us be honest. This cannot happen if we maintain the status quo and do the okie dokie. And as Reverend Keaton in his scholarship, and by the way, our resolution and this one campaign, One Charlotte campaign, this is the result of Dr. Keaton's scholarship. I'm just glad that I could even be a part of this. But we don't want to live in a city that's Dickinsonian, a tale of two cities. We can no longer cooperate with a system and sit on the sidelines and continue to live in a city with a permanent Black underclass where there is institutional racism and what Mr. Connors used to call structural violence and structural barriers to preventing real economic mobility for Black people. We've done the studies on economic mobility and we have been to meetings, but now is the time to act. Studies are not meant to collect dust on a shelf. They are meant to serve as roadmaps to engage in our democracy and make the change necessary needed if we're going to live in truly a moral city called Charlotte. I love reading history, but I'd rather make history, wouldn't you? Tonight, I'm honored to announce the launch of the Restorative Justice Charlotte's One Charlotte campaign. I'm going to wrap this up in about 2 minutes because Reverend Keaton is going to go through the resolution. If Charlotte is to become a world-class city, a moral city, one city, not a tale of two cities, one for the comfortable and affluent and another for low-income Black residents who have little or no chance of getting out of soul-killing poverty, then we must begin the much-needed discussion of what policies and programs we must put forward in our great city if we are to move forward in breaking the revolving door cycle of poverty, unemployment, drugs, crime, incarceration, and hopelessness for so many of Black Charlotte. Now, we know that we're 50th out of 50 cities in upward mobility. So there's two prongs, there's two tributaries to this campaign, the One Charlotte campaign. The first is to pass an aspirational resolution in the city council. And I'm not going to go too deep into it. We're going to let Reverend Keaton go into that. But we want to get it passed. And it's not just getting it passed, it's what follows after the resolution. Because the resolution not only calls for an apology and the aspirational goal that we become #1 in upward mobility, not 50th, but 6 or 7 policies that would, very specific about how we're going to get there. That's where the real work is going to begin to become One Charlotte. I'll close by saying I'm just honored to be a part of this, and I hope that everyone on this call will join us. Martin Luther King believed in having a beloved community. I think what Dr. Keaton and Rabbi Judy Schindler represent is what a beloved community is. And I look forward to the rest of this presentation. And thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I will say that every Black friend that I went to high school with and junior high, and I was a basketball player and a musician, almost all of them are either 6 feet under the ground, they were homeless, their future's broken, and this is personal to me because these are my friends that I grew up with since I was 12 years old. That's why I went to law school. It's why I do what I do. Why don't we change Charlotte and reimagine a new Charlotte? And that's why we need One Charlotte. So thank you very much.
Excellent comments. We're going to keep this moving right along. And so at this time, I would like to introduce Pastor Sheldon Shipman. Dr. Shipman is with us, and I'd like to ask him to give us, 5 minutes and talk to us about, why this restorative justice resolution is important and needed at this time. And after that, we'll ask Mayor Jennifer Roberts to follow Sheldon Shipman right after he speaks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keaton. And once again, I do want to thank you, sir, and Sister Rabbi Judy Schindler, along with Joel Segal, all that you all are doing with this initiative, this resolution, as you said, is very timely. It's very interesting because Joel said that it was personal for him, and when I finish my comments, I think you will know that it is definitely very personal for me as well. Dr. Keaton said earlier that we needed to make a demand. And I want to just start my comments with a great AME Zion preacher who many of you may know, but you may not know he was a Zion minister. His name was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass said, there is no struggle, there is no progress. He said, power concedes nothing without a demand. In this resolution, I want to give 100% support to it because I do believe it is not only timely because of the season that we're living in, but it's also quite necessary, and it will be doing a great healing for the Black community as well as for the whole city of Charlotte. So I celebrate the fact that we are going to collectively make a demand on August the 10th that we may move forward and not only pass this resolution, but actually see it activated so that we can have some measurable results that all of us can celebrate. When I think about this resolution, and I said this was personal for me as well, it's already been mentioned that there are two Charlottes, one very affluent and another Charlotte that is left behind. When I think about how we have one Charlotte that seems to benefit from a lot of all of the projects that take place, and then there's another Charlotte that always seems to be left out, and even though they're the ones that are impacted. Let me just give you a couple of dates. Back in 1956, when the Federal Highway Interstate Act began, as they laid those highways, they literally selected Black communities that would be divided. Those Black communities, I'll give you a few of them in a few minutes, but Interstate 77 is a perfect example. Then the Housing Act of 1954 started what I call not just urban renewal, but urban Black removal. And that was happening all across of America, displacing Black communities as well as churches, and including our own beloved city, the Queen City of Charlotte. It displaced Black Wall Street in the Brooklyn community, also known as Second Ward. The Good Samaritan Hospital, where currently the Panther Stadium stands. The devastation and the displacement and the trauma that was associated with it. I do possibly, and I do emphatically say that the Black community is still not fully recovered, and the things that are in this resolution would certainly be a good start to moving toward that healing of that trauma. It's been said already that we are 50th in the list of cities. I like the resolution because it does actively say that we not only want to increase it, but we want to become #1 in upward mobility. And as I get ready to conclude my remarks, I do want you to know there is a gentleman who was the gentleman who started the first African American Studies organization and program at Stanford University. His name was John Gibbs St. Clair Drake. And it's something he wrote in 1945, almost 75 years ago. It said, "As long as an educated and wealthy Nigerian can be Jim Crowed in Johannesburg in his own ancestral continent, and we can still see Ku Klux Klan crosses burning in Mississippi or being risen again, until Africans have their proportionate share of posts on great corporations that control their economies, or until one sees Black faces among the top elites throughout corporate America, both in the Arab world, the Hispanic America, Brazil, they are more rare now than any part of the racist United States." Listen to this key thing that he said in 1945. He said, "Mobilizations of Blacks is still necessary." This gentleman said this in 1945. When I think about that, it grieves my spirit because my family as well as my own church have been impacted by some of the policies that took place over the last 50, 60 years in Charlotte, North Carolina. In 1972, I was a member of the old Little Rock Church on McDowell Street, where Earl Village used to be. It was a thriving community. My wife's uncle, great uncle, Uncle White, had a home where the post office is located right now on McDowell Street. He was a member of Little Rock. And when I think about that community now, I always have to ask myself, where are the residents of Earl Village? Where are the residents of Old Brooklyn? Where are they now? There's only remnants that are still existing. When I think about my own church, and I'm about finished, Dr. Keaton, when I think about my own church, my church used to be part of the old Greenville community off of Statesville Avenue. But due to decisions that were made by local leaders at that time to adhere to progress, naturally capitalism, and at that time, what I personally believe was white priorities, my congregation had to move not once, but twice. We ended up in the Hidden Valley community where we've been now for the last 43 years. The list could go on and on about my personal witness and my families and different members of my congregation who we could get to give you their stories. But let me just conclude by saying
I think we lost Reverend Shipman.
Wonderful song to get us to move in the direction where we can not only have restorative justice in our city, but also healing and to create, number one, economic Black mobility for the city of Charlotte. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share, and I commend the work of Judy and Brother Keaton and Brother Joel. I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you again.
Mayor Roberts, the floor is yours.
Well, I tell you, it's very hard to follow these incredible pastors and leaders and doctors and reverends. I don't know what more I can say. But as Mel Watt told me once, everything has been said, but not everybody has said it. So I'm gonna give my own personal perspective and then turn it over to you, Dr. Keaton, to talk about the resolution, which we are all in 100% support of. I remember, I grew up in Charlotte too. In fact, Joel and I went to high school together at East Meck. And I remember very vividly in the 60s and 70s, the way that my friends of color were treated differently by other friends, by people in my family, by the society. And it struck me then as not fair. I've learned the history of how unfair it was, of how consciously unfair, of how wealth was robbed, and the generational poverty that has resulted. And I remember the disconnect in 2016 when Keith Lamont Scott was murdered. And I was uptown until 2 a.m. pretty much every night that week and heard stories of people in Myers Park having wine tastings. We've been to Charlotte's for a long time. And it's also been very, very tragic for me to see the resegregation of our schools. I went to an integrated school. It was fabulous. And it has, to see progress made and then progress failing and moving backward. I do think we are at a momentous time in our history. The concurrence of multiple crises, the pandemic showing health disparities, showing that African Americans who grew up next to highways and coal-fired power plants have weakened lungs, are more susceptible to pandemics and lung disease and chronic illness and time off from work and not being able to get promoted because of that time. All these things build together. And one thing I learned as a county commissioner with human services is that you don't treat one thing in isolation. And what I love about this resolution is that doesn't stop with the apology. It talks about how do we heal, how do we repair, how do we restore that which was lost. And we know that health and mental health and education are all linked to economic opportunity. We know that confidence and self-esteem are linked to survival. We know that being treated equally before the law is essential to anyone succeeding. And we know, as we see in cities across the country, that our police forces are overly militarized. And that has to end. There are so many solutions There are cities around the country that are having truth and reconciliation. There is so much that has been disrupted that it is time to take the broken pieces and put them back together in a way that is fair and just. And I believe the movement we have now makes something possible now that has not been possible until now. Sometimes you have to be really, really broken before you can mend. And I feel like we have reached that point. And it is personal to me as well, having been a mayor, having been a county commissioner, and feeling and seeing how inadequate our laws are and how slanted. And so one of the things I put in the chat was that we also have to remember we have a General Assembly, that the North Carolina Constitution has cities and counties beholden to the state for so much of what they are able and not able to do. So I am hoping that we will also be talking with them, but absolutely start with our city. Start with our city and our county. And there is so much opportunity. There is so much possibility. It is going to take a lot of voices. It is going to take a lot of people weighing in and emailing and calling and getting business leaders to do the same. I think a lot of people have some personal apologies that they could make, even if they make it just to themselves, if they recognize that. And a lot of people who look like me are finally coming to the table and recognizing that these were conscious decisions, and we are still seeing the suffering that has created. And so I'm here to follow. I'm here to support. I'm here to help make the connections. I've been talking to Harvey Gantt and Arthur Griffin and Hugh McCall, and we absolutely need to get a lot of support because the time is now. Dr. Keaton said it so well. The time is now. This is historic. This is an historic moment, and all of us can be part of history. And so thank you for letting me take more time than I probably should have. God bless.
God bless. Just want to also let you know that we've been talking about, the state efforts from the beginning, but, part of the goal, the short-term goal is to address, what's here. But I've reached out to Asheville, I've reached out to Durham, and my family, which is a clan, is in Wilmington, and there are tremendous historical wrongs that were created in Wilmington, and so the long-term or the medium-term goal is to have a North Carolina restorative justice bill that addresses a lot of the things that we are talking about, and potentially putting a restorative justice office in each one of these different cities and doing an organizing effort there. So let's look at the resolution, and before time gets away from us, I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So this is the Charlotte Black Upward Mobility and Restorative Justice Resolution. Whereas Charlotte is a tale of two cities, a city of prosperity for some and a city of abject poverty for others, and where upward mobility and the accumulation of wealth in the Black community in Charlotte for centuries was decimated due to slavery, discrimination against free slaves, Reconstruction. Let me stop here real quickly. Now, if we were to just focus on reparations, we could make a strong argument just on the stolen labor of enslaved Blacks here in Charlotte. If it wasn't for the stolen labor in the cotton, then so we could make that argument. But with what we're doing, restorative justice is larger than reparations. Is decimated due to slavery, discrimination against free slaves, Reconstruction, Jim Crow segregation, racist hiring, firing, a promotion of policies in the workplace, redlining by financial institutions, restrictive covenants, urban renewal policies that decimated Brooklyn and Second Ward. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic and recent uprising in response to the death of George Floyd have shined a light on how poverty and health disparities caused by decades of underinvestment and neglect of Charlotte's Black community have resulted in the needless deaths of COVID-19 of scores of African Americans who largely because of institutional racism suffer disproportionately high rates of diabetes, high blood pressure, asthma, food insecurity, air pollution impacts, and trauma caused by living in low-income Black communities. Whereas Charlotte is a leader in economic development in the South, is the headquarters for Bank of America, lost my place. Where is it? Sorry about that. My screen.
It was my fault. I moved it up. It's at the top. It's at the top paragraph. Bank of America, where Charlotte is the leader.
Yeah, see, the Economic Development South is headquarters for Bank of America and a hub of the financial services industries and one of America's most prosperous and affluent cities, yet Black residents have not shared proportionally in rising incomes, and Black children go hungry and homeless every day. And that's important because remember, if we're talking about upward mobility in 50th out of 50th, it is because of the Black economy. Whereas statistics empirically show that deeply rooted structural barriers to upward mobility, such as low-paying jobs, a discriminatory criminal justice system, I think somebody pointed that out, and we want you to know that we are going to be definitely focusing on the criminal justice system, mass incarceration, and the reentry struggles. Dilapidated housing, poor public schools, lack of high quality, affordable preschool, childcare, poor access to healthcare, lack of mentoring and after-school enrichment programs. And it's so powerful because where my church is at, where I pastor, there's not one licensed daycare. Lack of mentoring at school, lack of reliable transportation to and from employment, and emotional trauma have a disproportionate impact on upward mobility and the accumulation of wealth among people of color. And whereas in the post-war years, the thriving Second Ward was populated by Black residents, many owning comfortable homes, forming Charlotte's very own Black Wall Street. And in 1958, the Charlotte City Council voted to demolish the community of Brooklyn and Second Ward, crippling a major part of the city's Black economy and adversely impacting the upward mobility and accumulation of wealth by Black people in Charlotte, in the state of North Carolina, and the city of Charlotte have a historical legacy documented of not, I want to make sure that's not hyperbole, that is a historical legacy, a documented legacy of not prioritizing or investing sufficient resources in low-income Black neighborhoods and communities. And they have a pattern of neglecting these areas for decades and then coming back later, tearing them down, and then creating gentrification and displacement. Whereas between 1960 and 1967, during urban renewal, Brooklyn was raised in 5 stages, during which the community had no say in the plans for their neighborhood. 1,007 homes. I think that might not be right. I think it's 1,400 homes. Okay, 1,007 families, 1,400 homes, and nearly 10,000 residents. Okay, were displaced to the periphery of the city, and 216 Black businesses. And that is we need to, that might need to be in bold, even if it's not. But I mean, that's the heart of the issue. Because if you destroy these businesses, you destroy the birthright of many people and the opportunity for Blacks to hire within their own communities that is all eliminated. And so Black churches were closed, and not to mention what's not here is theaters, libraries, and also West Charlotte. Whereas a 2014 study by researchers at Harvard University and UC Berkeley ranked Charlotte area 50th out of 50th for economic mobility, meaning the probability that a child born to the bottom fifth of income will rise to the top fifth in his or her lifetime is just 4.4%. So organically, the whereas where it says between 1960 and 1967, and the whereas of the 2014 study, those two historical moments are directly connected through segregation. 2014, the Leading on Opportunities report that was done talks about segregation as a cross-cutting factor, and Tom Hanchett in his book says that in 1960, 1967, that urban renewal created the segregation that has led to segregation now being a cross-cutting factor in upward mobility. Whereas much needed healing, recovery, transformation, and justice in America will require a deep reckoning and systematic changes in race relations and upward mobility for Black people. Therefore, be it resolved that, and now we're going to turn to Rabbi Judy Schindler, who's going to cover the rest. And again, I don't know if it was noted, Joel Segal was the architect. He took a lot of research and scholar that Rabbi Judy and myself had been working on for a year. Joel Segal took that scholar, put it in the form of a resolution, and then Mayor Roberts, I like to say she came along and put the icing on the cake. Rabbi Judy Schindler.
She was the midwife who birthed it, and it is in City Council's hands right now. So when you listen, we've had a lot of studies, we've read a lot of history, we've had a lot of education. We know what's wrong. Here's what we're going to make right. And as you listen, I want you to think to yourself, I support this piece of it, and here's why. Because I want you to take a piece, a quote, this text. It's, well, you have the PDF, we'll get you the links. I want you to write City Council and say, I support this and here is why. We're not giving you a form letter. We want you to own it. And we want you to own the pieces you love. And every day, post it on social media. Here's something that we need, I believe we need, and the change we need to see happen. So therefore, be it resolved. This is what we're calling for. The City Council of Charlotte, in an effort to heal and transform our city, apologizes and acknowledges the tragic past mistake of the city government's support of Charlotte's urban renewal policies in the 1960s that destroyed Black wealth and impeded upward mobility. Number one step to healing is an apology. The City Council needs to lead the way. All of us need to follow and be on board. The City of Charlotte embraces the concept of restitution and restoration for Blacks in Charlotte, adopts the goal of being number one in upward mobility, and will create a Mecklenburg Investment Trust for Black upward mobility as a public-private partnership fund to provide access to capital to create restorative measures in 6 areas of harm: business, education, trauma, mental health, re-entry from incarceration, and housing, land ownership, anti-displacement, affordable housing. The city will also support the regrowth of Black businesses in Second Ward. We aim to set up a trust that individuals, congregations, philanthropists, businesses can support, a fund that will accelerate upward mobility for the Black community, repair the harm that has been done in all these areas. So you can support this trust when it's established. Say, you know what, I want this money to go to re-entry because we built a courthouse and a jail where Brooklyn once stood. And at the center of Brooklyn was Black Wall Street. And at Black Wall Street is a building that still stands, Mecklenburg Investment Corp. And Restorative Justice Charlotte has its office in that building. The third floor, the lodge where people met to organize and build power and support one another. The City of Charlotte will work with Mecklenburg County to create a community-based COVID-19 testing program for all low-income Blacks and implement a zero-tolerance policy for evictions, utility cable, and water cutoffs during the time of COVID-19 for Black people. We know that COVID is disproportionately harming the Black community. They can't get the resources that they need, such as testing. We need to get it there. We need to support the community. The City of Charlotte will work with the Mecklenburg Charlotte School Superintendent and Board to create a mandatory African American racial diversity curriculum for public schools with a focus on Black literature, history, culture, political science, music, and the arts for a more authentic telling of American history, and seek to re-establish a second ward high school. The City of Charlotte will work with leaders in the Black community to accomplish without limitation the following: securing local, state, federal, and/or private sector funding to support this plan, improving the quality of public schools and including a job training curriculum, developing jobs for all training and job placement program, including green jobs for all job seekers in the private and public sectors, providing tuition-free community college, trade school, or technical training for all low-income African-American students, developing 100% subsidized high-quality childcare, preschool, and mentoring programs for all low-income African-Americans, building world-class recreational centers in Black neighborhoods with computer training, sports mentoring, and after-school learning and enrichment programs. The City of Charlotte will continue to invest in affordable housing following a housing first policy, including scattered site public housing, supportive housing with wraparound services, and units that are located in high employment corridors with access to public transportation. The city will adopt a goal of ending homelessness and will provide incentives to include housing for those at 30% AMI and below, including the redevelopment of Second Ward. The City of Charlotte will support low-cost and accessible mental health programs and healthcare facilities and clinics in low-income Black neighborhoods. The city will advocate for a minimum wage of $15 per hour for all public and private sector employees. The City of Charlotte will advocate for a justice system that prioritizes restorative justice, eliminates cash bail, funds recidivism reduction programs, passes ban-the-box legislation, provides mass incarceration prevention programs, and expands nonprofit legal aid society offices to provide reduced and/or free services to low-income African American residents. The City of Charlotte will seek continued community input to rectify past harm to the Black community and build a future that is prosperous, safe, equitable, and just for every resident. So here is the resolution, and now is the time. We wanted to leave the next 5 to 7 minutes for questions about the resolution, and then we are going to give you your marching orders. How we are in 2 weeks' time, less than 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks from last night, how we are going to get this resolution spread far and wide so that we can get it passed and be the ones to move forward to create that truth-telling, that restoration, and that systemic change that is needed for one Charlotte to be created. So I'm going to turn it over to Joel Segal, who will answer your questions. So feel free to unmute if you have questions. We'll see how that works, or raise your hand and we can call on you. And if it gets chaotic, we'll figure it out. So anybody have a question about the resolution? I see Ken Schrader. So Ken, ask Joel your question and we can all chime in.
Okay. Thanks for recognizing me, and thank you all for doing this. This is awesome. I really appreciate what you all have done to organize this, to get this out in front of the city council and the community, and to garner support. I know there's more work to do there. My question is, this is very, it can be taken to be very political. And politics, as I think most of us know, is really a back and forth collaborative effort at its best. So, for example, suggesting that there will be a required curriculum to teach Black American history. I think the state may decide that that's something that they have more power over because it is education. What's the plan B for this? What if we can't get all of these resolutions to be recognized by the city to be something that they actually say that they're going to act on? What's the next step? What do we do then?
Very briefly, I think Dr. Keaton, do you mind taking this one?
Yeah, I'm gonna just for a couple of seconds, and then I'm gonna let you take it because I have to step into a Bible study. But one of the things we do is in organizing is we don't start with planning a plan B because we want to go at this. And remember, that's why it's called the demand. Even if we have to include the county commissioners in that, but again, we're not asking for anything that is beyond the realm of possibility by saying African American children who are in a school system, and in many schools they're already 90% Black anyway. There should be no issue with teaching education that is more historically accurate. So that's I see no reason to start thinking about a plan B as of right now. We want to go in with confidence, asking that these resolutions be considered, and if they're not considered, that we're going to organize. And for those politicians that don't support it, there needs to be this presentation that there's going to be political ramifications if you don't support this, because now we're organizing around the resolution, but we do intend to organize around get out the vote and voting when it comes November.
No, I agree that we should look at this as 100%. But what you just said really is a plan B. That we organize, we go to the streets, we go to city council meetings. So, and that's really what I wanted to hear is that we're not.
But that's not a plan B. That we're already doing that. That's not a. I mean, we're already planning around, getting out the vote and participating in the election. And right. We have part of what we want to do is just like most organizations, we have a lobbying extension to what it is that we're trying to do. So that's a part of the DNA of restorative justice.
Okay, so it's a multi-pronged approach that we're trying to do.
Exactly. Right. But listen, again, we always talk about we spend so much time plucking bodies out the water, but we have to pluck bodies out the water and go upstream and find out why the bodies got in the water in the first place. So we're doing both of those at the same time.
Okay.
Ken,
Great.
thank you. Ken, I just want to tell you, first of all, thank you for your question, and it's nice to meet you. What we're really doing, I really wouldn't call it political as much as moral. This is moral.
I agree.
Number one. Number two, it's also necessary if we're going to achieve restorative justice. But number three, and I think Willie and Rabbi Schindler and all of us are working on this, we are 100% nonpartisan, and we're asking for a unanimous passage because we're saying this is coming from the majority. This is an expression of the majority of the residents, of our city. So to us, this is democracy in action. But I appreciate, Ken, what you're saying. And if you want to talk with me further, please call me, email me, because I want to get your input. We're going to need everybody's input.
Sure. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joel, there's a great question in the chat box that says, how does what we are determined to do compare with other North Carolina cities that are also working on this?
It's a great question. I think what Dr. Keaton's vision and Rabbi Schindler is to lock arms with other cities who want to do something similar. I know that Reverend Leo Woodbury, who's a close confidant of Al Gore and the vice chair of my organization, Justice Action Mobilization Network, wants to introduce this resolution in Florence, South Carolina. And the sense that I'm getting from other people who've been looking at the resolution, they're very interested. There are people who I've talked to in Chapel Hill that want to do it, but I think it'd be really good if we could do some research. If there are, in fact, other resolutions or organizations that we can work with, and then actually bring them into the process when we first have passed our resolution.
Okay, and there's another question in here that says, I wonder about the requested minimum wage increase without considering the benefits cliff. So can you just speak a little to why the minimum?
Well, by the way, can there be a little elaboration on the word, the benefits cliff? That's kind of new semantics.
Well, if the person who posted that in there would like to jump in, unmute yourself, and if you would like to.
This is Joan Killian, and I think the benefits cliff being as you increase your wages, you begin to lose some of the benefits like childcare or WIC or things like that. And so you actually end up being worse off, even though you may be making more per hour than you were before. And so that, I think, is a state legislative issue as far as what happens with benefits. But I'm not positive about that. So I just wonder, yes, people may be making more in a paycheck, but they actually get less in some of the other benefits that they would have accrued.
Joan, that's an excellent question, because these are exactly, as someone who has worked in government for 34 years, this is exactly the kind of questions that we have to be prepared, to answer. So I'm glad that you raised it. I will say this, that most people, even right now, they're not making 15 an hour. They're making about 8 or 9. They can't live off that. And even $15 an hour is very, very difficult to live off of, no matter where you live. Just as a floor, I mean, $15 is not asking for much, and that is a consensus across the country, is the fight for 15. In terms of benefits, if we're calling for example, universal health care or jobs for all or child care preschool, let's assume that what we're asking for is that the benefits would not be cut, but in fact, they would be expanded. And I'll close by saying, you see, we're used to, I don't want to be political, but I'm gonna have to be a little bit. Reaganville and the 1,000 Points of Light, which was promulgated by Daddy Bush and Son Bush, and that's let charities take care of our people. We need public-private partnerships, but see, we have to move to a new system. The old system does not work for Black people and low-income people and communities of color. And it's our job to say, we want a new system that's moral and ethical and based on the principles of restorative justice. So that means universal access to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which our country, quite frankly, doesn't believe in that. And that's our job, is to say, well, we think everyone should have the same basic needs met, and clearly they're not.
Are there any other questions? Oh, John, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you for all the incredible work on this. It's clearly so much thought and heart, and just the healing, what you're doing. I had a chance to connect with Joel today. I just put a note in the chat, and Rabbi Schindler, thank you for the response. I'm curious, once this gets out there, since to be, historical Charlotte way is foundations and certain groups sort of put something out there and ask people to adopt it, what kind of dialogue there'll be around, like Charlotte for Black Futures, organizations on the ground who may want to provide input, our young people, students, just so it's very, and y'all may have already put into that, but I definitely want to help support making sure people feel heard and included, so there's really strong ownership. So just curious what you all think, how that can be executed.
Judy Schindler?
So John, and I'm going to ask Mayor Roberts to fill in on this, but you know, I think we distribute this far and wide tomorrow, tonight, right? We send it to organizations. If they are struggling with pieces of it, they should write city council. It's in their hands now to say, I love this, and this is something I'd want to see included. So we're asking you, I put a Google form there in the chat box. We will send you tomorrow a PDF, a link to the restorative justice site, which has the resolution, a roster of city council members, and the form, so you can say, here are organizations I'm reaching out to, and here's what I need from you to do my job. If you see this and you don't yet feel comfortable using your voice, just call us. We'll talk you through it. But Mayor Roberts, how do you recommend if a grassroots group, we've met with many groups, but if a grassroots group wants to add something, what is your recommendation for adding and transforming this resolution?
Mayor Roberts had to leave to go to another meeting. She just posted that in the chat box, and then she had to go.
Here's the,
so, yeah.
Okay, Joel will say something, but here's the amazing thing. Last night, we met with this city council many times. We met with Dimple to ask for an apology. She said, just get 6 people, I'll have the attorney write it. We met with Julie Eisolt. She says, the apology is the easy part. How are we gonna make it happen? She gave us the idea of tax districts. Brooklyn Village is a $693 million project with 2 hotels. If we had a tax district around it and a portion of the taxes went into this fund to invest in businesses so they could be in those sites, to invest in affordable housing so we could have you know, accessible housing in that site. We met with Mayor Lyles. She said, this is easy, an apology, but we want to see those who benefited from the demolition of Brooklyn neighborhood, at the Brooklyn community at the table. So we keep meeting with people. We met with about 6 council members, 7 council members about this. Then yesterday we went to speak. I was the last speaker. I did my 2 minutes, ran a second long, and Mayor Lyles says to me, we're putting it on the August 10th agenda. We were astonished, right? Oh my gosh, this is already going before city council. So they have it. They're moving it forward, but it's your time to reach out to city council members and say, I love this, but here's what I'd like to see in it. I'm going to pass it to Joel, who has far more experience with this than I do.
I don't know about far more, but maybe a little bit.
You
do. Well, just like the Constitution is a living document that's been amended throughout history as the times change, you know, so this resolution. So what Rabbi Schindler said is absolutely correct. Also, if people have ideas, I've been tasked, you know, along with Reverend Keaton and Rabbi Schindler and Jennifer Roberts, you know, to kind of open the door and to begin that process of, it does become a negotiation. So whatever ideas that you have, if you want to add language or delete language, could you please send that to me at Joel? I'll put in the chat box, joel.r.segal@gmail.com. I will say, I will invoke Congressman Conyers because he's the one who taught me, you know, how to legislate. The guy was there for 40 years. We changed Medicare for all 13 years in a row. We changed it. And the beauty of something really being a great bill or resolution is the input of everybody who is part of this meeting and your friends and colleagues. So, you know, and I've already seen in the chat box all these great ideas. So please send them to me and we can continue that process of refining the resolution. This is a starting point. As Reverend Shipman will always say, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So we need your input. Thanks.
And there is one more question that I neglected, and I apologize. How does this resolution address the inequalities in affordable housing, particularly for seniors? How is that being?
Sure. That's a very important question. My mother, who is 89 years old, if she was not being subsidized by me personally, would be homeless. There are thousands and thousands of seniors who cannot live off their Social Security benefit. The average monthly benefit is $970. What we're calling for in the resolution, and we're very clear, we're calling for an end to homelessness. We're calling for housing, affordable housing for all Black people. So we're saying housing as a universal right. It's now a privilege. And because of the efforts of Judy Schindler and Reverend Shipman and many of you, we've gotten further down the line. I ran Charlotte's emergency shelter system in the early 90s, and the same problems that I saw years ago in my early 30s when I had hair and it was brown, I come back 23 years later and it's worse. Right, Dr. Shipman? Because you were on the board of directors of the Kendall Gill House. So
correct, sir.
Yes, every senior citizen has to have affordable, quality, decent housing, again, as a basic fundamental human right, not a privilege. And I think that's where we lost our way in terms of our moral compass.
Okay.
Rabbi, you are muted at this moment. Don't know how that happened.
And then I'll share some final notes and thank you, and we will be off by 7:15 as we promised. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank you for the work you've done up to this point and the work you will do over the next 2 weeks. So we will wake up on August 11th and see that we have made headlines, not only local but national, and that we will continue to drive to ensure this work is fulfilled. Judy Sheldon Cohen is on the phone. She made so much headway in affordable housing as a leader of that advocacy effort for the Stan Greenspan Center. Thank you, Mayor Roberts, for your leadership in getting this to and through City Council. We have more work to do, but I have confidence. Thank you, Pastor Shipman, for your tireless leadership. Dr. Sadler, who's left, and Dr. Keaton and Joel Segal for authoring this and leading the way. The City Council meeting is August 10th. That's our deadline. Let's get to work. Please post every day why this matters. Post the resolution, share it with friends, get them to own it, talk with them about it. We need to truly move this forward. We do Teach-In Tuesdays every several weeks. We have a Teach-In Tuesday, a Black Business Spotlight on August 11th at noon. We'll send that link out to you. So following this session, we will send the PDF of the resolution. We'll send a roster of City Council members. We will send a form, a link to a form, so that you can let us know with whom you can connect and what you need from us to do that. So please reach out to everyone. I want to close with some words. A place, a holy site in my life is not just Jerusalem, but Selma and Montgomery. I am inspired by the work that was done, and yesterday, Congressman John Lewis crossed over that bridge. And so we think about crossing over bridges. We can't rest on the laurels of what was once done. We have to cross over those bridges today. A great Rabbi, Abraham Joshua Heschel, marched hand in hand with Martin Luther King and John Lewis and all those others who were there. And he was asked, he took leave from his role as a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and he was asked what it meant to him to cross over that bridge. And he said he was praying with his legs, or people say he was praying with his feet. So ask your fellow parishioners, even if you're not connected to a church. We have 960 churches in Charlotte with street addresses. So ask people to pray with their feet, with their voice, with their hearts, with their hands, to create the future that I know we can create. So thank you for joining us. And we are here to work with you to bring about restorative justice in Charlotte. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.